Reed Hastings' Next 5 Moves. There's a book that just came out by Patrick Bet-David entitled Your Next 5 Moves. That's where the terminology, Your Next 5 Moves, came from that I'm applying it to Reed Hastings. I just read Reed Hastings' new book, No Rules, and it's a fascinating look. I'm going to cite a few ideas from it and apply it to what I believe Reed is going to be doing strategically at Netflix in regard to his next 5 major rules. So first, no rules. Reed Hastings talks a lot about managing for context rather than control. What that means basically is that when you're running a big enterprise, especially a big creative enterprise, you don't have time, obviously, to micromanage, and it's a waste of resources, and you can't compete. He talks about like a pure software, his previous startup, which he says wasn't a success, but I think was sold for a large sum of money, perhaps $750 million. So when you get to Reed's level, that's probably not a huge success, but Netflix obviously is much, much bigger. But the processes kind of got in the way at a certain point because the best people got tired of the processes and they left. And at a certain point, they couldn't innovate, so they had to try to grow by acquisition, and that kind of was a little bit of a dead end. So he learned from that. I mean, there's a lot of stories that go into it, and he employs something at Netflix called talent density, which means that, and I'm simplifying everything because you have to read the whole book. It's much more detailed and it's fascinating. But basically, talent density, as he describes it, and his co-author is brilliant also, is that, and again, this is a simplification. One, I'm gonna get into how this is gonna play out in the future. I'm just setting the background now. So, one employee that's off the charts is better than 3, 5, or 10 that are good to mediocre, because when you get great people together, they feed off each other and become better. When you have a mix of great people and not so great people, then it kind of descends to the lowest common denominator, and you waste too much resources in supervision because time is money also. So if you have to spend all your time supervising people, it's not worth it. And so he pays top of market or above market a little bit to get and retain the best people. All right, so with that backdrop, and again, that's very simplified, where is Reed going in the future? So you have to look at what is accomplished and what needs to be accomplished. So obviously, Netflix has grown tremendously to hundreds of millions of subscribers, and internationally, worldwide. But what is the next level of growth? What is the next level of success, and what does it take to get there? So this is where I think Reed is going in his next 5 moves. So the first thing is that even though Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, not owns it, but is founder and CEO, he owns he's worth $170 billion, even though he just sold $3 billion worth of Amazon stock. So so Netflix, their 2 major competitors are Amazon and Amazon Prime and Disney Plus. There's quite a few other streaming services, but what is going to differentiate Netflix going forward from Amazon and Disney Plus specifically? So I want to focus on that and see where I think Reed Hastings is positioned and is likely to go. So on a macro level, both in terms of the companies and the CEOs, let's look at those individually. Reed Hastings worked in the Peace Corps, and I think he's very kind of philosophically and personality, relationship driven. That came through a lot. He believes in making it like a sports team rather than a family, so he doesn't get carried away in terms of relationships being the be all, the end all. But he's very, very big on feedback. It has to be the 360 feedback. It has to be regular. It has to be very candid. So he's built a culture where you take the best people of talent density and then you provide them an environment where they can make mistakes, but they have to learn from their mistakes, and they're responsible, and if there's someone better, they get replaced. Now, Jeff Bezos is kind of a little bit similar to that, although he uses different language, because Amazon doesn't pay the greatest, but they really have like an innovation culture. Now, what I was going to say before is that Amazon is focused on their own culture as opposed to competitors. They're focused on being consumer focused, customer focused, rather than competitor focused. And so, what's going to differentiate Amazon Prime and Netflix and Disney Plus? And I'm going to get a little bit more into the CEOs. So, I think one thing that's going to separate them is kind of like a transition from culture to metrics and technology. Let me explain that a little bit. Now, you're not going to lose anything with culture, but it's kind of a matter of art and science. Like, there's certain things that AI and machine learning can do now, and there's certain things that it can't. I mean, increasingly over time, more and more professions are being replaced. Even doctors and lawyers are going to be replaced. It's not only truck drivers and cashiers. And a lot of the creative elements, like, magazine articles and newspaper articles, are being written by AI now. And Watson has a lot of applications. So the future of Netflix and content is going to be much more AI and machine learning driven, to kind of get a scientific, if you will, understanding of what kind of content, to look for patterns. See, like the greatest, like Ted Sorensen, I think his name is, this co-CEO, he has an incredible amount of experience, and you learn from your failures, but you can't go through the data patterns of successes and factors associated with that like a computer can. Now, there's certain things, obviously, that a human could probably still do better than a computer. I'm not saying a computer could do everything, but it's going to be like human assisted or computer assisted, just like how robots are now being made more collaborative so that they can work with human beings, because there's certain things that humans could do better. Like humans could do fine motor pickups, although computers are getting better at that also. So it's going to be kind of like a collaborative thing. So Reed Hastings, in one of his next 5 moves, he's going to move Netflix more towards a touchy-feely, if you will, type of environment where it's individually driven in terms of hits and determining hits, to more of a kind of like a standards. Like, people will still be individually accountable, but there'll be like the creative people will be interfacing more with data scientists and machine learning people to learn exactly how to put some science into the art. Now, I want to say a little bit about Netflix versus Amazon versus Disney. It's going to be hard for Netflix totally to compete with Amazon Prime, because Amazon is an AI leader. And you could argue that, AI is going to have more of less of an effect, but most people agree that in almost every industry, including in creative industries, I mean, even actors are being replaced by CGI. So some people feel it's not going to be any actors anymore, by and large. So how is Netflix and how is Reed Hastings going to compete with the AI capabilities of Amazon? Now, that's kind of an interesting question. I think that if I were Reed Hastings, I would be asking myself, what can Netflix do, and how can Netflix take its incredible culture and talent density that it has and use that to competitive advantage against Amazon in an AI world? Now, let me talk about Disney. Now, Disney has a lot of heart share and mind share because they've been around a long time, and they have generations of hits. Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, The Lion King, Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast. The list goes on and on. The Little Mermaid. The list goes on and on and on and on. And I watched a master class by Bob Iger, who's recently retired, I think, and he's just brilliant. He had the courage to go against his own board as one of his first decisions And he made, I forget which purchase it was, maybe Pixar or Lucasfilms, I'm not sure. I think it might have been Pixar, because he said their animation wasn't up to snuff and they needed to. I mean, to tell Disney when you just get hired as CEO that your animation is not up to snuff and you have to buy somebody else, it takes a lot of courage. And I think Reed Hastings and Jeff Bezos are both innovators. Like, I want to talk about a little bit about Reed Hastings' next move also as an innovator, because he took on Blockbuster and he had that fiasco where he split Netflix into two different companies and he learned to take better feedback. But he's always looking several steps ahead. And Bezos is looking several steps ahead. Like, he's taking his money from e-commerce and now, becoming a huge factor with Blue Origin. And I've done a lot of focus on space podcasts and a lot of examination of that. But not Michael Eisner, Bob Iger, and now I think Bob Chapek is the new CEO. Bob Iger is an incredible innovator also in terms of new thinking and how to, he was a little bit late to the game on streaming, but the idea is that how are these companies going to differentiate themselves? Like, how can Netflix take their culture and apply it to this new world of content and be more efficient that way? So a couple thoughts in that regard. I think that Netflix has more of an international expertise than Amazon. Like, Amazon sells all over the world, but I think Amazon is kind of like more getting their feet wet in terms of like what content is popular in different parts of the world. So I think that Reed Hastings has a little bit of a leg up there. And I think that Disney obviously is an iconic brand across the world. But I think that one area that Amazon has an advantage that Netflix, I think, and Reed Hastings need to do as one of their next 5 moves is to learn more about convergence. Like, Amazon is kind of like a conglomerate, a modern-day conglomerate, because they do hardware, they do content, they do e-commerce. So, nowadays, like, content is going to be affected by e-commerce, it's going to be affected by blockchain, it's going to be affected by, robotics and nanotechnology, all these different artificial intelligence, all these different technologies, Internet of Things, crypto, are interfacing. So you can't just be a content company and be the winner in the long term. You have to understand all these convergences. So Reed Hastings is one of his next 5 moves. Has to become not just a content company, but he has to become almost like a logistics company. Like, let me explain. Like, Amazon is not necessarily an e-commerce company. They're really an AI company, masquerading as an e-commerce company, because their AI, is in cloud services, it's in delivery services, it's in Alexa, and so Netflix, Reed Hastings and Netflix, he's going to have to expand his capabilities to understand, IoT and artificial intelligence and all the other different realms that I was talking about. So I think that Netflix has the advantage there. Now, in terms of Disney, I think Disney has the international reach, in a way, in terms of mind share that even Netflix doesn't have. So I think that is something that, Reed Hastings is also going to have to examine in his next 5 moves. But I think that even though it's better to focus on the customer than the competition, Reed Hastings is going to have to be like laser focused. Like, there's an example in the book where Sheryl Sandberg shadowed him for a day or a week, I forget how long it was, and she made a comment to him that he didn't make one decision, and he said that's a successful CEO that just sets the culture and the context so everybody else can make good decisions. And the co-author of his book, No Rules Rules, says, "How much time do you have for the book?" And Reed goes, "Oh, I have plenty of time." So I think Reed knows how to free himself up. I think as Reed is freeing himself up, one of his next 5 moves is going to be to really do a deep dive on some of these other convergent technologies, because we don't live in a world of domain-specific knowledge anymore. We live in a world of convergence. And I think Netflix is vulnerable to being wiped out by something that comes from across the bow. Like what happens if crypto is like, blockchain is tied into content intrinsically, and Netflix knows nothing about crypto. I mean, that's just one example. So I think as one of his next 5 moves, Reed Hastings has to become like an expert and hire experts on all those cross disciplines and cross domains that are going to interface with content increasingly. Like we live in the law of accelerating returns, and what happens is the amount of change is less than expected in the short term, but is more than expected in the long term. And product adoption cycles are shorter and shorter and shorter. It used to be that like it took generations for a new product to take hold, like the maybe like the steam engine or even the airplane, and then it's getting shorter and shorter. And now Instagram got to 1 billion in 2 years, and Uber got to 60 billion in I think like 7 or 8 years. Eventually, we're going to get to $1 trillion company in like 6 months. So Reed Hastings has to learn how to use all these convergences to his advantage to not only compete against Amazon and Disney, but to really compete. Like every company is becoming like every company, like Apple, Facebook, all the FANG companies. They all really compete against each other because tech company is like every company is becoming a tech company. So every company is like cross-pollinating with every other company. So Reed's going to have to get much broader in his understanding and his implementation of these other technologies.